Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Okay, good. Today we're tackling project management,
Oh,
but from a really interesting angle, I think. It's not just the typical software focus. We're going deep with Scott Berkun's book, Making Things Happen.
oh, that's a great one.
Yeah, and it pulls wisdom from all kinds of places, not just software. We've got restaurants, we've got historical projects.
Right, like kitchens, architecture, all sorts of things.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which I love. I love those kind of surprising connections. And one of the things that Berkun really emphasizes is the importance of learning from failure,
Yeah.
but not in a like beat yourself up kind of way.
Oh, for sure. No.
More like
Yeah.
some of the biggest engineering breakthroughs actually came about because people took the time to figure out what went wrong in the past.
It's more about taking failure as like valuable information rather than something to be afraid of.
Yeah, yeah.
Look back, learn from history. It's all there.
Right. Like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We get so excited about the next new thing, we forget to look back.
Always chasing the shiny new thing. Yeah.
Exactly. But, okay, speaking of the next new thing, Berkun has some really interesting thoughts on creating a strong vision.
Oh, yeah. The vision thing. That's crucial.
So important.
Yeah.
And he says we need to look at it from three different perspectives. We've got the business goals, obviously, then what customers actually need, and what's technically possible. It's like a three-legged stool, right?
Absolutely. You miss one of those and the whole thing collapses.
Totally. And he even uses this Venn diagram analogy in the book, which I thought was clever. Three circles: business, customers, technology. And the sweet spot is where they all overlap.
A great way to visualize it. And, I find that so often teams struggle because they're only focused on one or two of those circles.
Yeah.
They forget about the customers or they get so caught up in the tech that they lose sight of the business goals.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
But, okay, let's say we get those three perspectives aligned. How do we actually create a vision document that will inspire the team and guide the project?
Right. Berkun breaks it down into 5 key qualities. He says it needs to simplify complex ideas, be intentional and focused, consolidate key information, be inspirational, and, importantly, memorable.
I love that emphasis on memorable. He really pushes back on the idea that a vision document should be this boring list of bullet points.
Yeah.
He's a big fan of visuals, mock-ups, anything to bring that vision to life.
Oh yeah, visuals are so powerful. Even a rough sketch can convey so much more than a paragraph of text sometimes.
Think about a time when you were really inspired by a project vision. What made it stick with you?
Good question. For me, it's usually when the vision is tied to a larger purpose, something that resonates on an emotional level.
Okay, I can see that. Something that makes you feel like you're part of something bigger.
Exactly, like you're making a difference in the world somehow.
That makes sense. Okay, so let's say we've got this great vision. Now we need to start translating it into action, and that starts with requirements, right?
Requirements are key. Think of them as the bridge between your big, inspiring vision and the actual work that needs to get done.
Okay, the bridge. I like that analogy.
They should be clear, specific, and unambiguous, outlining exactly what needs to be built and how it should function. Berkun has a lot to say about how to deal with ambiguity in requirements, which is often a major source of problems in projects.
So true. Okay, so we have the vision, the requirements, and now comes the fun part, right? Brainstorming all those awesome ideas.
Ah, yes, the idea generation phase. Berkun talks about this concept of the problem space, which might sound a bit technical at first.
Problem space, what's that?
Think of it like this. It's all the possible solutions within the constraints of the problem you're trying to solve. He gives this great example, that classic think outside the box puzzle, where you have to connect 9 dots with 4 straight lines.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Took me forever to solve it.
Right. It's a good illustration of how we often limit ourselves by the way we frame the problem. We get stuck in our assumptions.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we break free from those assumptions and come up with truly innovative solutions?
Berkun says the secret is asking the right questions. He even tells the story about a logic professor who would deliberately go off on these tangents during lectures.
Oh, I love a good professor
He
story.
would keep going and going until a student asked a very specific, well-crafted question. And that's when the real learning would happen.
It's like the question itself unlocked the answer.
Exactly. So what's the key question that can help us unlock progress in any project? Berkun suggests it's simply this. What problem are you trying to solve?
So simple, yet so profound. I feel like we often jump into solution mode without really taking the time to define the problem clearly.
Happens all the time. We get so focused on the how that we forget about the why.
Okay, so we've got those good questions flowing, ideas are pouring in, but now we have the challenge of turning those ideas into action.
Right. It's easy to get overwhelmed at this stage. I'm picturing that classic scene, a giant whiteboard covered in sticky notes, everyone feeling a bit lost.
Been there. How do we make sense of it all and start making decisions?
Berkun actually shares a story about a particularly chaotic whiteboard diagram that represented all the ideas being considered for Internet Explorer 4.0.
Oh, wow, so this is a real-world problem.
It was a brilliant mess, as he describes it, and this is where the power of iterative design comes in.
Iterative design, so not trying to get everything perfect right away.
Exactly. It's about making decisions, even if they're not perfect, to keep things moving forward. You experiment, you learn, you adjust.
It's like that saying, perfect is the enemy of good.
To quote Nobel laureate Joshua Lederberg, there are still enormous amounts of trial and error. You go back and forth from observation to theory.
Love that.
Yeah.
So how do we wrangle all these ideas and turn them into a cohesive plan? Any practical tips from Berkun?
Absolutely. He recommends a few techniques that I think are really helpful. One is the affinity diagram, which is basically a visual brainstorming tool. You write down each idea on a sticky note and then group them together based on their relationships.
Ooh, I like that. I'm a very visual person, so that would definitely appeal to me.
Yeah, it helps you see the big picture and make connections that might not be obvious at first.
And what about those nagging questions that always come up? You know, those little things that can sometimes derail a project if you don't address them.
Ah, yes. Berkun suggests keeping an open issues list. Basically, a running list of all the questions, big or small, that still need to be answered.
Okay, so a place to capture all those wait, but what about moments.
Exactly. And the key is to actively manage that list, prioritize the issues, and assign responsibility for tackling them.
It's like a safety net to make sure nothing falls through the cracks.
Love that analogy. So we've explored the problem space, brainstormed ideas, organized them.
Yeah.
But now comes the moment of truth, making decisions.
And those decisions aren't always easy, are they? Especially when you're under pressure, facing tight deadlines, and maybe you don't have all the information you'd like.
Project management in a nutshell, right? But here's the interesting thing. Berkun acknowledges that sometimes you just have to go with your gut, trust your intuition and experience.
So it's not always about painstakingly analyzing every single variable. Sometimes you just got to trust your instincts.
Exactly. He even provides this framework for sizing up decisions. Ask yourself, what's the potential impact of this decision and how urgent is it?
Okay, so if the impact is high and the urgency is low, we have time to gather more information. But if both are high, we might need to make a quicker call.
It's about choosing your battles wisely, recognizing that you can't overthink every single decision.
That makes sense. But what about data? It seems like everyone's obsessed with data-driven decision-making these days. Where does that fit in?
That's a great question. Berkun's stance is that data should be a tool to inform decisions, not dictate them.
So not just blindly following the numbers.
Right. He cautions against falling into the trap of analysis paralysis or using research as ammunition to support our own biases.
It's about using data to illuminate the path, not blind ourselves to other possibilities.
Exactly. Okay, so let's say we've made those tough decisions. Now, how do we communicate them effectively to the team?
Communication. My favorite topic. What does Berkun have to say about that?
He believes it's absolutely fundamental to successful project management. He's a big advocate for what he calls management through conversation.
Management through conversation. So fostering open dialogue, I'm guessing?
Yes. Creating a culture where everyone feels comfortable sharing ideas, concerns, even disagreements.
And that includes actively listening to what others have to say, right?
Absolutely. He stresses that listening is not just about waiting for your turn to speak. It's about truly hearing and understanding the other person's perspective.
I'm definitely guilty of not always being the best listener, but it's something I'm working on.
We all are. It's a skill that takes practice. And Berkun also talks about the importance of avoiding communication pitfalls like interrupting, blaming, or using jargon that not everyone understands.
Yeah, jargon can be a real communication killer. And speaking of things that can kill a project, let's talk about processes. Berkun actually used to think processes were just bureaucratic red tape.
Oh, interesting. So what changed his mind?
Well, he came to realize that well-designed processes can actually streamline communication and workflow, empower teams, and remove unnecessary obstacles.
So it's not about bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It's about finding the right balance between structure and flexibility.
Exactly. Okay, and finally, we can't talk about project management without talking about meetings.
Ah, the dreaded meetings. I'm guessing Birkin isn't a fan of those endless, unproductive gatherings.
He shares our pain. He believes meetings should only be scheduled when there's a clear purpose and a strong facilitator to keep things on track.
I'm all for that. So often, meetings are just a default setting when a simple email or phone call would do.
Totally. And Birkin provides some great tips for running effective meetings. Clear agendas, time limits, only inviting essential people, making sure everyone has a chance to contribute.
It's about making meetings productive and engaging, not a drain on everyone's time and energy.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here. Vision, planning, communication, processes, meetings. But we know that project management isn't always smooth sailing, right? What about those moments of crisis, pressure, those unexpected curveballs that life throws our way? How do we manage those difficult situations?
That's where Birkin's insights on managing risk and pressure come in. And I think this is one of the most valuable parts of the book. He provides a framework for recognizing and responding to those tough situations that can make or break a project.
Okay, break down that framework for us. What's step one?
Step one, and it might sound counterintuitive, is to calm down.
Calm down. But what if the sky is falling?
It's natural to panic when a crisis hits, but Birkin says the first step is to take a deep breath, gather yourself before reacting.
So don't just react, respond.
Right. Then, gather information, assess the situation, develop a plan.
Easier said than done sometimes, but I can see how important that is. Don't just jump into action without thinking things through.
Exactly. And Berkun also talks about the importance of understanding our own emotions, how they can influence our decisions.
Oh, that's so important.
Yeah.
I know I've made some bad decisions in the past when I was stressed out or feeling overwhelmed.
We've all been there. He introduces this concept called the Satter change model, which suggests that our underlying beliefs and values shape our emotional responses to pressure.
Okay, I'm intrigued by this Satter change model. We might need to do a whole deep dive on that sometime.
I'm in. But before we get sidetracked, you mentioned another interesting concept, something about a hero complex.
Ah, yes, the hero complex. This is about those individuals who thrive on crisis.
The ones who secretly love putting out fires.
Sometimes I think they even create problems just so they can be the hero who solves them.
You know, I think I've worked with a few people like that. And while their can-do attitude might seem admirable at first, it can be detrimental to the team in the long run.
So not about discouraging initiative or hard work, but recognizing that sustainable success comes from a well-functioning team, not from individual heroics.
Exactly. And that brings us to the importance of trust. Berkun emphasizes that trust is the foundation of any high-performing team, and it's built through consistent commitment and open communication.
And he actually breaks down the elements of effective commitments, drawing on the work of Watts S. Humphrey.
Oh yeah, the Humphrey checklist. A commitment should be valid, achievable, measurable, owned, consistent, visible, and reviewed.
It's a great framework for making sure that your promises actually carry weight. But building trust also involves delegating authority effectively, right?
Absolutely. When you delegate, you're not just handing off tasks, you're empowering your team members to take ownership and make decisions.
It's about showing them that you trust them to do the job. And finally, there's the importance of trusting yourself.
Yes, self-reliance is crucial for effective leadership. It's about having confidence in your own judgment, being willing to admit mistakes, and being open to changing your mind as you learn and grow.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress. To quote Ralph Waldo Emerson, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds.
Love that quote. So, to sum up, vision, communication, trust, all essential ingredients for making things happen.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in Berkun's book, from prioritization and execution to navigating the sometimes treacherous waters of office politics.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive. So much good stuff in that book.
Right. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think one thing that really stood out for me was Berkun's emphasis on understanding the why behind what might seem like illogical management decisions.
Yeah, I remember that. Like, sometimes those decisions make no sense on the surface.
Exactly. But he argues that there's often this hidden business logic that we might not see at first.
So don't assume it's just bad management. There might be a reason.
Right. Ask questions, dig deeper. It might make sense once you have the full picture.
Okay, that's a good reminder. And speaking of reminders, another big takeaway for me is the power of clear communication.
Absolutely. He's all about clear communication. It can make or break a project.
And he gives all sorts of practical advice, right? Like active listening, avoiding jargon, being mindful of how we're coming across.
Yeah, all those things. But beyond individual skills, he also talks about the importance of creating a communication culture within the team.
What does he mean by communication culture?
Well, it's where open, honest feedback is encouraged and valued, where people can speak up without fear of being shut down.
So like psychological safety.
Exactly. Where it's okay to disagree, to challenge ideas, to bring up concerns.
Because sometimes the best ideas come from those healthy debates.
For sure. And he also points out that some of the most valuable communication happens outside of formal meetings.
Oh, interesting. So like those casual conversations.
Yeah, those water cooler moments, grabbing coffee with a teammate. That's where trust and relationships are built.
It's like that saying, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Right.
But it's also where you say it.
Right. The context matters.
Yep.
Okay, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of the specific tools and techniques that Berkun recommends.
Okay, love some practical advice.
One that stood out to me was the concept of a coding pipeline.
Coding pipeline.
It's basically a system for managing the flow of work from the initial design phase all the way through to release, development, testing, all those steps.
So keeping things moving smoothly.
Exactly. He stresses the importance of keeping that pipeline flowing to avoid those frustrating bottlenecks that can really throw a project off track.
I can see how that would be crucial.
And speaking of keeping things clear, he also talks about the importance of briefing the team effectively.
Briefing. What does he mean by that?
It's all about providing clear, concise instructions for each task or work item, making sure everyone knows exactly what they need to do, when they need to do it, and why it's important.
Makes sense. I've definitely been on projects where the instructions were vague or constantly changing, and it just created so much confusion.
Right. Clear briefs can save a ton of time and headaches down the road.
Okay, that's a good one. What else?
Well, then there's the whole bug management process, which can be a real nightmare if you don't have a system in place.
Oh yeah, bugs. Every developer's favorite topic.
Berkun actually has a whole framework for tracking, prioritizing, and resolving bugs.
So not just frantically trying to fix things as they pop up.
Right. It's about having a clear process for reporting and categorizing bugs, figuring out which ones need immediate attention and which ones can wait.
Some triage in an emergency room.
Perfect analogy. You have to determine who needs immediate care and who can wait a bit.
Right. Okay, so we've got bugs under control. What about the final stages of a project? That exciting but also stressful time leading up to launch.
Yeah, the home stretch. Berkun provides a framework for managing those final stages, from code freeze to release.
So how do we make sure everything goes smoothly and we don't have any last-minute disasters?
He talks about having clear exit criteria for each milestone, meaning you know exactly what needs to be achieved before you can move on. And there's also a process for tracking progress and identifying any potential risks that could derail the launch.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Everyone's on the same page, and you're not just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best.
Exactly. And he also suggests having what he calls a war team in place to handle any critical issues that might pop up during those final stages.
A war team. Sounds intense.
It's basically a small group of decision makers who are empowered to make those quick, tough calls to keep the project on track.
So like a SWAT team for software development.
Exactly, ready to jump into action if needed. And then, of course, there's that final agonizing wait for release.
The waiting is the hardest part.
He describes it as a waiting game, where the team is constantly monitoring the product, watching for any last-minute bugs or issues that need to be addressed.
I can only imagine how stressful that must be.
But it's also incredibly exciting to see all your hard work finally come to fruition.
So, big picture, what are some of the insights that have really resonated with you from making things happen?
I think one of the most valuable things is the importance of having a clear vision.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, but it's worth repeating.
Without that shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve, it's so easy to get sidetracked, lose momentum, and ultimately fail.
It's like trying to sail a ship without a destination.
Exactly. That clear vision acts as your compass, guiding your decisions and keeping you focused.
Okay, vision is key. What else?
Another big one is the importance of embracing iteration, that idea that we're going to learn and adapt along the way.
So, not trying to get everything perfect right from the start.
Right. Berkun reminds us that the best solutions rarely emerge fully formed. They often come from a process of trial and error, experimentation, and continuous improvement.
It's that fail fast, fail often mentality. but with a focus on learning from those failures and making things better.
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about the importance of communication. Birkin gives us so much practical advice on how to communicate effectively, from mastering active listening to avoiding jargon and blame.
It's all about creating a culture of open and honest dialogue, right?
Absolutely. And being able to have those tough conversations in a constructive way, focused on finding solutions.
Because conflict is inevitable, right? In any project, in any team.
It's how you manage that conflict that determines whether it will be a destructive force or an opportunity for growth.
Okay, so we've talked about vision, iteration, communication. But let's not forget about the human element. The fact that projects are ultimately driven by people.
Right. People with their own complexities, motivations, emotions.
Berkun provides some really insightful advice on how to manage those interpersonal dynamics, especially when things get tough.
He gives us that framework for recognizing and responding to those high-pressure situations, starting with the importance of staying calm and gathering information before reacting.
Don't just panic and make a rash decision.
Exactly. And he also talks about understanding our own emotional responses to pressure and how our underlying beliefs can influence our behavior.
And you mentioned this concept of the hero complex earlier, which I think is so relevant in today's fast-paced work environment.
Oh yeah, the hero complex.
Yeah.
Those individuals who thrive on crisis, who resist planning, and believe that heroic efforts are always necessary.
I've definitely worked with a few heroes in my time. And while their can-do attitude might seem admirable at first, it can actually be detrimental to the team in the long run.
It's not about discouraging initiative or hard work. It's about recognizing that sustainable success comes from a well-functioning team, not from individual heroics.
It's about sharing the workload, empowering team members, and recognizing that everyone has a valuable contribution to make.
Exactly. And that kind of teamwork requires a strong foundation of trust.
Berkun emphasizes that trust is built through consistent commitment, open communication, and effective delegation.
He even breaks down the elements of effective commitments, drawing on the work of Watts S. Humphrey. A commitment should be valid, achievable, measurable, owned, consistent, visible, and reviewed.
Wow, that's quite a checklist.
But it's a great way to make sure that your promises actually carry weight.
Makes sense. And when it comes to delegation, it's not just about handing off tasks. It's about empowering team members to take ownership and make decisions.
It's about showing your team that you trust them to do the job.
And ultimately, it's also about trusting yourself.
Right. Self-reliance is crucial for effective leadership.
It's about having confidence in your own judgment, being willing to admit mistakes, and being open to changing your mind as you learn and grow.
It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, and that's okay. To quote Ralph Waldo Emerson, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds."
I love that quote. Okay, we've covered so much ground in the second part of our deep dive into making things happen. Vision, iteration, communication, managing risk and pressure.
And we still have one more big piece of the puzzle to discuss. How do we navigate the often complex and sometimes treacherous terrain of office politics?
Ooh, office politics. That's a whole other can of worms.
It's that element of human dynamics that can sometimes feel like a game. A game with winners and losers, alliances and rivalries.
So how do we play the game effectively without compromising our values or integrity?
That's the million-dollar question. Office politics, it's a reality in pretty much any workplace.
It's that human element, right?
Exactly. And Berkun actually provides some really good advice on how to navigate it all. He starts by talking about the two types of power, granted and earned.
Okay, I remember that. Granted power is basically your position in the hierarchy. Right.
Right, like the authority that comes with your title. Whereas earned power is based more on your reputation and your expertise.
It's the difference between being a manager and being a leader.
Exactly. You can be a manager just because of your position, but true leadership, that's earned.
And Berkun warns against the misuse of power, using it for your own benefit rather than for the project or the team.
He's all about using your influence responsibly, not just trying to climb the ladder or anything.
He even talks about some specific tactics for influencing power, like making direct requests, building coalitions, leveraging relationships.
Those tactics can be used in good ways or bad ways, obviously.
It's about using your judgment and always thinking about the bigger picture.
Right, thinking about what's best for the project and the team.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. Vision, planning, communication, risk management, office politics.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But what I find so valuable about Berkun's book is that it all comes back to that human element. It's not just about processes and tools.
Exactly. Projects are all about people working together.
And Berkun really challenges us to think about the human impact of our decisions, to see things from other people's perspective, to create a work environment where everyone feels valued and respected.
And where they feel safe to share their ideas and speak their mind.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of that question you posed earlier, about good questions attracting good ideas. What's that best question we can ask ourselves to unlock progress?
Such a good question. I think for me, it would be, what's the one thing I can do today to move closer to my goals?
I love that. It's about taking action, even if it's just a small step.
Right. Because sometimes we get so caught up in planning and overthinking that we never actually get started.
That's so true. Okay, well, on that note of taking action, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Scott Berkun's Making Things Happen. We hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as we did.
And remember, keep asking those good questions, keep learning, and keep making things happen.
That's it for today, folks. We'll see you next time.